really delighted to speak to this group, and I'm always really delighted when I get patients who are already knowledgeable about Weston A. Price Foundation and the principles of nutrition that Weston A. Price illuminated and discovered, and Sally has continued to teach about. And for me, Weston A. Price has made a huge difference in my life and in my medical practice. I remember I read Nourishing Traditions about 25 years ago, or it seems like it was 25 years ago. Maybe it wasn't quite that long because I was already in the Bay Area. So no, it must have been like 20 years ago. But it really changed how I practiced medicine, how I understood nutrition. And I was already working as an integrative medicine doctor at that time, but the whole idea of cholesterol being so good for you, and things that had really not made sense to me in my very limited Western medical nutritional training all kind of fell together. And also things in my own body, like when I was a little kid, I would just want to eat butter, and we would be at a restaurant and I'd be taking those little pats of butter and eating them. And my mom was like, "Don't do that. That's not good for you." And I was like, no, it felt so good. It felt really deeply nourishing to me. And so it was so validating to understand the biochemistry and why these things were deeply nourishing. So Freedom from Anxiety was my second book that I wrote, and I wrote it because I have struggled lifelong with anxiety, and I've through that struggle have learned a tremendous amount about mind-body tools, shifting my thoughts, nutrition, herbal remedies, just a whole gamut of ways to find relief. And it's worked. I'm actually a pretty calm and peaceful person, and I don't really have, it's not like I never have anxiety, but I don't have the kind of extremes of anxiety that I had when I was young. When I grew up, I was in a household that was just it was a hair trigger, and there was really no difference between the house is in fire and where are my keys. Everything would just escalate up to this really intense level really fast. And so, I developed kind of a fast twitch nervous system that I think I have really managed to settle down to a nice, peaceful nervous system. So I'm always happy to talk about the things I've discovered. And, on my journey, which has always been the case, whenever I've become interested in something like this, since I've been a doctor, I realize it's going to help a lot of patients and it's going to help a lot of people. So I love to share that, and I love to take questions. So, if you have any questions, then, please feel free to ask them. So I am an MD. I started out my healing journey as an herbalist, and I started out as an herbalist after I had a vision at age 12 where plants spoke to me and said, so here's the whole story. As I was riding my bicycle, because I love to ride and ride and ride and ride and ride. And then so I got to this field of wildflowers, and this was in Houston, and I would ride out of the town limits and got to a field of wildflowers, and it was so beautiful. It was springtime and it was all just a bloom. And I sat down in this field and I just felt really bliss. And then I wanted to describe it to my parents, and in thinking about how to describe it, I realized I didn't know the name of any of the plants except for dandelions. And then I had a little moment of sadness, and then I had some shift in consciousness, and the plants themselves offered to be my teachers. And I accepted, and that has been completely solid for me my whole life. And so really foundationally, even though I went to medical school, the thing that I find most reliable is my connection with the natural world and my connection with plants. And so that's my go-to area. And so it's a little different than most doctors. I went to medical school after being an herbalist, after studying different kinds of body work, after even writing an herbal column, because I really wanted more power in the system, and I really wanted to understand physiology more deeply, and I wanted to be able to order tests but have a different kind of interpretation for people in different contexts. And then finding Weston A. Price was huge in that. Okay, so anxiety. So the way I wrote the book, I was very deliberate. So I started out the book with talking about our thoughts and the importance of how we think and what we focus on, and how noticing how we feel from that. And then I progressed through that through different kinds of mind-body techniques, meditation, breathing techniques, and I'll talk about some of those. And then herbs, nutrition, etc. And so I wanted it to be things that in the whole first half of the book is nothing you have to pay for at all. It's all things that can be done themselves. But I also think that that's really foundational in how we are finding peace, because I believe that there really is a river of peace inside of each of us, and that we can learn to find that and connect with it. And once we have the roadmap inside of ourselves to that, then it's so much easier not to get lost in extreme anxiety. And so I really try to develop that with people as I work with them, and just try to find out where they are. And I give lots of different exercises, and I'll talk about some of them in a little while. And then at the very end of the book, I mention pharmaceuticals, because, I think anything is a tool, and I'm not really fond of pharmaceuticals, but sometimes they can be useful. But so many people just jump right into pharmaceuticals, and they don't really cure anything. They can give some temporary relief, but I really wanted to have a whole panoply of tools available for people. And I think that that's been very helpful, and is really exactly how I approach this with patients. So something that I've learned through the years is, and that probably many of you know, but maybe not, is that there's a strong connection between well-being and feelings of well-being, and feelings of inner peace, and a good functioning immune system. And so our immune system is 90% of the receptors on the immune system cells, like T cells and B cells, are either receptors for endocannabinoids or endorphins. So that's our own kind of modulation of mood neurotransmitters and feelings that are being constantly gauged by our immune system. And so that was really fascinating to me. And also that because of the legal status of cannabis for so long, the research on that was really stymied, like forever. And only now we're really understanding our endogenous cannabinoid system, and how really important that is in terms of regulation of mood, and in terms of regulation of our immune system. So that being said, because people who are happier will tend to be healthier, and there's been a number of studies of that. And so that's always population-based studies, and population-based studies don't, as they always teach you in medical school, do not apply to the individual. So an individual is an individual, and a population is just a general trend. But people who are happier will tend to have less overall illnesses, less autoimmune problems, live longer, have happier marriages. It just goes on and on and on. And so how do we start to develop that? So one of the things I know is that what we think about matters, and how we focus really matters. And those are things that we can learn about and query ourselves, and then make shifts if we're not happy with what we're finding. So have any of you read the book by Dr. Candace Pert, Molecules of Emotion? It was an older book. I guess it came out in the 90s. And she looked at how our brains and our bodies make neuropeptides in response to different emotions. The book is called Molecules of Emotion. And so what I have likened that to is this like different rooms of emotion in our body, mind, spirit. So there's the silly room and the happy room. There's the cranky room and their fearful room. And the more you, and each of those things makes different neuropeptides. Each emotion that we have will make different neuropeptides. And so when we start having anxiety, we start focusing on something that makes us anxious. So for me, I would worry all the time in the past about my loved ones. Like if they were taking a plane flight, I would be worrying that the plane would crash. And just different kinds of things, fantasies that you don't really want to have, but it's not uncommon with people with anxiety to have, you know, these chains of thought that just keep going on and on and on. And so when you start to step into that room and then you have that thought, then you have that emotion, and that emotion creates a neuropeptide. And so then you have, it's sort of like a color scheme, you know, so that you're in that color scheme of that. And the more you think about those kinds of things, the more you make those neuropeptides, and the more you get more evidence. And it's like walking deeper and deeper into that room. And so what I learned early on is that I just had to stop it. Like I couldn't just keep focusing on the things that were upsetting me, because there's no bottom to it. You know, you can't get to the bottom of it because there's no bottom, and you're just going to keep going deeper and deeper into that room. And so I learned to just do different things. And this was through a lot of study as well, distraction, meditation, breathing exercises, etc. But also just using that analogy of closing that door on that room. And I didn't try to go from like extreme anxiety to like the happiest place I'd ever been, because that's too much of a leap. So I tried to get to just like boredom, neutral, even like minor irritation was better than extreme anxiety. So if I could just get myself to a better place, then I would be in the road out of the room. So some of the tools I found that were really helpful was when I was in a good place, I would, and I suggest this to patients too, to make a list of positive memories or thoughts and things like that they have. So, you know, and I always ask people, like, what do you like? What feels good to you? You know, walk on the beach, looking at the sunset, playing with your child or your grandchild or your dog, petting your cat, sitting on the grass, cooking a complicated meal, or having somebody else serve you a complicated meal, or and what are things that feel really good? And I always ask people for memories, thoughts, and even fantasies that are unencumbered. So if it's like, well, it's good, but this part of it is not good, don't put it on the list. You want something that is not encumbered whatsoever. And so when that anxiety starts to build, and I ask people to write it down, and then they can pull out their list, you know, my birth of my child, you know, my, you know, parents' 50th anniversary, I mean, whatever is meaningful to you that is a happy event that you can think about. And the thing about thinking about is not just having the thoughts, but remembering. So that you know, remembering it, we're bringing it back into our body. So many people have heard about the rehearsal effect. So that's like a basketball player who is to do a free throw, will imagine doing the free throw in their mind. And actually, when they've studied that, they've seen that the same parts of the brain and in the nervous system, the same muscles and neurons will fire as if it was happening, even if the person is just rehearsing it. And so we're re-putting that into our body. So if we re-put into our body our happy, good memories and thoughts and things that we love, then we're getting that same kind of rehearsal effect. So back to this neurotransmitters and the neuropeptides. So many of those are really short-lived, and to the ones of anxiety, once we can start to shift out of them, most of them will really start to dissipate in 1 to 2 minutes. And so we can really close the door on that room and open the door on a lot of better feeling emotions, or at least neutral feeling emotions. Another analogy is like when you're going down the supermarket aisle, which most of us don't go in lots of supermarkets, I would imagine, but with how the different things will light up, the freezer section will light up as you walk down. And so it's a lot like that. So you basically want to go past that freezer section of the non-organic, GMO food, and you want to get to the freezer section only of the delicious, nourishing foods that you might want to actually consume. So it's the same with your emotions. So this is kind of the tools I start out with this, is for people to notice how they feel. So, and that's kind of amazing to me. I once was involved with somebody, and we would have these big fights, and that I would be all upset, and she would be all upset, and then I'd say how I felt, and I'd say, and how do you feel? And then once she finally said, I don't know. And then I really got it. Like, she didn't know how she felt. She wasn't going to be able to really process any of this. And then I started to realize, I see that with so many of my patients. They don't even really know how they feel. So that is really the first step, is identifying where you are. Because if you want to move to a better place, you need to know where you're starting out from. And then acknowledging where you'd like to be pointing yourself to. So if I'm feeling really miserable, I just want to feel better, and I want to feel better. And then, so if I just say to myself, I feel really terrible now, I feel really scared, I feel really hurt, whatever I feel, and I really just want to feel happy and peaceful. So then I'm directing my consciousness towards how I would like to feel. So I've got the arrow in the direction, and then try to also then notice what my messages to myself are. And I try to encourage my patients to notice what their messages to themselves are. And so you need to know what you believe. Do you believe you can feel better? Do you believe that, you're trapped? Do you believe other people are creating terrible things in your reality and you have no power over that? Because that's a horrible feeling. And do you really need to believe these things? And what else could you believe? And when you think about these things that you believe, how do they make you feel? And so then it comes back to, how do you feel? And what would make you feel better? And so I often will get people to kind of talk about their story and then tell a different story, and tell the story of what they want. And sometimes it's amazing to see how much people want to phrase what they want by what they don't want. Well, I don't want, oppression, and I don't want, different things. And so then I have to keep nudging them and say, but what do you want, without saying what you don't want? And that can really lead to some breakthroughs. All right. So another breakthrough with me was just acknowledging that when I feel really down, just saying I want to feel better, and remembering that I haven't always felt like that, and that I'm not going to always feel like that forever. And so that also reframes things. So essentially, your emotions can provide you guidance, and can help you to understand where you're at and where you want to move to. So if you look at emotions, it's just not these like uncontrollable forces, but something that can move you towards better feeling or worse feeling, that you have power over, is all the difference. And you do have power over it. If you change your thoughts, then those neurotransmitters will dissipate, and you will get a bunch of new neurotransmitters that will match the new thoughts and the way you feel about the new thoughts. And even if you felt terrible and you feel that's a big improvement, and then from you can go to okay, so you can also just take it in a kind of a stepwise manner. I'll just have a little quote here from one of my osteopathic teachers. So I'm an MD, but I also studied osteopathy for many years and really completed training. So I didn't mean that I get to call myself a DO, but I can, I have full osteopathic training. So Jim Jellis, one of my osteopathic teachers, he said, most everyone is living in a movie that they are projecting that it is not actually happening. And that really sums it up for what I was living when I lived with so much anxiety, what I see in so many of my patients. And, you don't have to be living in this movie that's not actually happening. And I, finally realized that many of these really worrisome, dire things that I, projected never happened. And usually things actually worked out pretty well. And that, I think we think that if we're saying no to what we don't want, we're less likely to have it. But that's not true. I think that we're actually less likely to have it if we can just be in our own, connected with our own inner wellspring of peace. And that really mostly things do work out okay. Like most of this dire stuff, like nobody ever in my family ever crashed in a plane. I know that people do sometimes crash in planes. I don't deny that bad things do sometimes happen, but me worrying about it wasn't going to make it not happen. It just makes me miserable. So, and I think that's also true, like in terms of worrying about the world. So that's just my musing. All right. So tools for improving things. Meditation is a really powerful tool for improving things. And that can be any kind of, mantra meditation, chanting, a walking meditation, like walking a labyrinth. I love the labyrinth in San Francisco that is at Grace Cathedral. It's a beautiful labyrinth. I don't know if you can walk labyrinths now, but there will be a time that you can walk labyrinths again. But you can also just get finger labyrinths. So there's a few of them in my book, but you can look them up on the web as well. And you can just trace the labyrinth with your finger. And so when you enter a labyrinth, you have an intention. So if your intention is something like alignment with yourself, alignment with your own sense of inner guidance, inner peace, and then you just trace the labyrinth with your finger. And then you get to the center and you pause there as long as you want. And you go out. And then typically people will do that process, especially with the finger labyrinth, like 3 times. And then just notice what insights come. So people a lot of times say they can't meditate because, they have too much mind chatter. And nobody can meditate when they first start meditating. Everybody has too much mind chatter. That's the whole point of meditation, is to quiet the mind chatter. So I really believe anybody can meditate, but some people don't do really well with the silent meditation. So doing some sort of other meditation, like a moving meditation or listening to an ambient sound or something like that, might be better choices. Time in nature is also really, really essential for healing and connecting with the natural world. So sometimes we'll talk with people about what natural places they like. Berkeley Marina is often very popular. Hiking in the woods is often very popular. But, people sometimes just want to go out in their backyard. So there's that book, Earthing, and as a wonderful book. And it talks about how really the earth can absorb a lot of the charge from our systems, and it really helps that to neutralize. And so just connecting with the earth, which can be taking off your shoes and walking on grass or even pavement, and or sitting down on the earth or leaning on a tree, but having some connection with the earth, can be wonderful. And personally, I've found when I'm having a lot of anxiety, or when I've had a lot of anxiety, just like going outside and sitting on the grass would really, really help me. And then if I could notice other things like bird song or wind or anything to get out of my own train of thought, that would even be more expedited. So I highly recommend that. Okay. So movement and exercise also is really helpful for alleviating anxiety. So it can be some sort of programmatic movement like doing yoga. It can be very balancing, but just taking a walk or stretching, using your body in a way that you don't usually use it. Um, Whatever feels good. Is good. And people always say, what's the best kind of exercise? And the best kind of exercise is the exercise you will do. And so the best kind of exercise is not the exercise that you don't like, that you don't want to do, that someone told you should do. The best kind of exercise is doing what you like. For me, I have always liked dancing, kind of free dancing in my home where nobody's like looking at me, or I just have like a few people who I really trust. That is like really great kind of movement for me. And then also being out in nature, whether it's just like walking my dog or taking a really long hike. But and our needs for this and our desires for that change. And we'll talk about that a little bit with nutrition too. But exercise also really helps us to drop charge. Other simple things that we can do is smile. Smiling is really good. Smiling actually gives a lot of messages to our brain and to our whole nervous system about our state of being. And it's not even necessarily a fake it till you make it kind of thing, but actually the act of smiling can often cheer people up. And there's laughing is also really, really wonderful for mood. One of my patients who had this really bad nervous system injury and was on full disability started, attending one of these laughter groups, which is like a phone group where you just call up and there's all these people all over the country who you don't know, and they're just going to all laugh together. And it's very infectious. And so people are really laughing and laughing and laughing for no reason. And he had tremendous improvement in his pain levels and his mood and everything. And he's continued that. This has been like 15 years now, and he still does the laughter groups, and he's much more functional. He was able to, he wasn't able to go back to his prior job, but he got a job as a dog walker. And then he started being a specialist dog walker where he worked with like ill dogs and learned to give them their medication. And, he basically went from like unemployed on full disability to laughing his way to good health and a really great mood. And then he found a relationship. His wife had left him when he got the disability, and he found this really wonderful relationship. So laughing is very powerful, very good. All right. And so, as we all know, nutrition is really, really key too. And so many people, I was just talking to somebody last night who had been a bodybuilder, and she, in her bodybuilding school of thought, when she was doing it, they allowed no fat at all. And so she was eating just like massive amounts of protein, some carbs, no fat. She was allowed 10 almonds a day, but it was horrifying. And, and she doesn't do this now, but she was having egg whites, and she was having like 150 grams of protein from egg whites a day and no fat. And like her whole nervous system crashed, and she became really depressed and suicidal. And no wonder. Uh, so fats are really, really important. That's why little Marcey, at 5 years old, was eating the butter pats. And, I knew that was good for me. And so we need fats for our body, and we need healthy fats for our body. And I always try to teach people to listen to the body, but the caveat is not always listen to the mouth, especially when we're just kind of learning things. The mouth also can be educated in the same way, but when people feel like they have like these intense cravings for sweets, kind of coordinating between what the mouth seems to want and what is really happening is very helpful. And so reaching for when we're feeling anxious for good fats, cholesterol-rich foods like eggs or dark meat of chicken, antioxidant-rich foods like berries or chocolate, a little bit of chocolate, um, and normal amounts of protein is going to really give us much more even mood, of course, than eating a lot of sweets or carbohydrates. Um, Chocolate, I'm very fond of chocolate, and I think that it is good. Chocolate has PEA in it, phenylethyl I don't remember PEA. Anyway, so it's a neurotransmitter of bliss and falling in love, and so that's why a lot of people, when they're down, will really want to consume more chocolate, because it actually is a neurotransmitter in there that's pretty powerful. Um, and then there's, nutrients and vitamins. So this is where I start to move into like specific things, like should people take supplements or not? And a lot of times when I'm working with people with anxiety, and I try to get them doing all these different exercises. I'll give you one more exercise I like to do before I move on to that. So, two more. One is I love. All right. And so I love, you write on a piece of paper and you just start to like free float through, I love sunsets. I love seeing the Milky Way. I love smelling babies' heads. I love my dog and cuddling with my dog. I love playing with my dog and tossing balls with my dog. A lot of dog. I also love my cats, who are very sweet, and I love how they go without actually making the meow sound. And so you can just write down, I love, I love, I love, and it's very personal to you. And I've done that sometimes for like an hour and a half, and I will like really be like euphoric by the end of, an hour and a half of writing down what I love, because I'm also feeling all that love as I do it. So that's a really fun exercise and really nice. And then you also then have this list at the end of things that you love that you can refer back to when you're feeling not as good. So that's one. And then there was another exercise that you can do at bedtime, and that is what went well. Because a lot of times at bedtime, or a lot of times when we think about what happened in our day, we think of what went wrong. And then we think of not only what went wrong, but then we was like, how did that happen to me? So you just turn that around. So you think of what went well. And it can be anything. It can be something big. It can be something little. It can be the clerk at the supermarket seemed to be very nice. Or it can be, I saw a beautiful sunset today. Or it can be, my daughter just had my first grandchild. I mean, so it can be like some huge number of range of things. And then you ask yourself, how did that happen to me? So instead of saying, how did these bad things happen to me? How did these good things happen to me? Well, and I had a really nice exchange with the clerk at the supermarket, because I was kind of joking with her and she was kind of joking with me, and it went very well. And I just felt a human connection. Or I saw the beautiful sunset because I looked out the window and could see a beautiful sunset. So I gave myself the time to look at that. And so that's a really nice thing to do before bed. And so if people can come up with 3 nice things that happened today and kind of examine what went well, that actually sets the mood for some good sleep. Okay, so nutrients. So besides the overall diet that we all love, looking at individual nutrients is really important. So when we're having a great deal of anxiety, we can really deplete our adrenals and chew through B vitamins. And there's certain patterns that we can see. So for example, low thiamine. So people have low thiamine, which, can be depleted by alcohol, too much shellfish, and especially raw fish, which I do really love sushi. Tea and coffee can also deplete thiamine. They might have like obsessive negative thoughts, feelings of impending doom, and also falling asleep and then waking up like a really brief time later, like 15 minutes later. Those are all classic signs of thiamine deficiency. So when I wrote this book, it was really fun because I was already really into Weston A. Price. And so, I was looking at food sources for everything. So rich food sources of thiamine: liver, nutritional yeast, beef, pork, whole grains, especially those that have been soaked before cooking, green peas, asparagus, spinach, beans, nuts, especially Brazil nuts, peanuts, and bananas. So these are all like, and this is when, I'm not going to read you all this stuff out of the book for every different vitamin, but it's all like similar stuff. It's just like all what we've been taught: organ meats and soaking our grains and sprouting them and whole foods. And that's where we can get all these delicious nutrients. And sometimes people need to take supplemental nutrients, but just moving to Weston A. Price based whole food diet is really tremendously helpful. And avoiding sugars and sweets and things that jack up the nervous system. Other ones that are really important. So they're all really important, really, because we're just one, big body and nervous system that's all interconnected. But vitamin B5, pantothenic acid, which is also in liver, eggs, dairy products, yogurt, nuts, fish, green vegetables, legumes, avocados, etc. So that's really important for support of the adrenal glands and also support for detoxification. And it's an essential cofactor in producing serotonin. So I will often work with individual nutrients with people, and I can do some assessment of levels of what people need, but it can also talk with them about kind of what their patterns are and what their nutrient needs are. So even psychiatrists will often work with inositol. Inositol is actually a carbohydrate type of B vitamin that's found in many foods. Let me see if I can find you a list of inositol foods. Yes. Cantaloupe, oranges, nuts. It's in grains and legumes, but only bioavailable if they are pre-soaked. Where have we heard that before? And discard the soak water, and that makes the inositol more bioavailable. And inositol is a wonderful anti-anxiety nutrient, and I use it a lot. And I use it a lot as a supplement. And even many psychiatrists will use it because it's used for obsessive thought, intrusive thoughts, PTSD, panic disorder, and it's very safe. So an adult person of normal weight could take up to, if they needed, 20 grams a day, which I've only, in my whole years of practice, only had like 3 people that needed that high of a dose. And it is very inexpensive as a supplement too. So that kind of thing can be quite helpful. And that's one that I started to take pretty early on for myself. And the dose that I would take of inositol is usually like 1 to 2 grams a couple times a day. And I get such a nice melt of my feelings of distress and those kind of recurrent thoughts that can be very distressing. So I really encourage people to look at some of these kinds of things in addition to doing the mind-body kinds of things. It definitely sounds like a phobia. And so there's, with phobias, often there's desensitization. It can be very helpful. So, and then also, in terms of the realm of therapy, there's cognitive behavioral therapy. And you can kind of do a combination of cognitive behavioral therapy, which is about shifting the thoughts, and desensitization. So desensitization might involve just touching her hair first without any scissors nearby, or having her hold the scissors, or just different pieces. If she even wants to engage in that, if she feels like she would, like to move forward in terms of cutting her hair. And then in terms of nutrients, it would help. The inositol that I just mentioned would be calming because it helps that kind of reactive obsessive thought, or glycine, not lysine, which is like more antiviral, but glycine, Glycine, which helps the body to make more calming neurotransmitters. And those are both very safe in children of any age, really, and even pets. Like I've given my dog, not this current dog, but my elderly dog, got very anxious before she passed away. And I talked to my holistic vet, and she's like, yeah, glycine, it's great for dogs. So that was good. So, and it's great for children too. And it can really help with those kinds of phobias. So the dose for an 11-year-old would kind of depend on her weight, but like 500 milligrams to 1 gram. But I would look into like working with her on her thoughts about it and seeing if she wants to change it. The thought I had, and this may just sound really nutso, but I'm just going to be myself, it's like how in the Native American tradition, and particularly the Navajo, like they really felt like their power was in their hair. And they had the code speakers in the Second World War, and they were all Navajos that had really, really long hair. And they had this way of communicating that, besides the Navajo language, but they really could understand kind of psychic events that were happening. And when they cut their hair, that went away. And that when you said that, that was the thing that popped into my head. And I have no idea if it's relevant, but sometimes I'll just tell people those things that pop into my head, and sometimes I don't. And this time I felt I should. Okay, so sensitive nervous system, you're absolutely correct. Like, so there's it's a gift, but it's also, a challenge. And so it does make you more intuitive. It often makes you more compassionate, but barriers are really good. So here's a few choices, and you can see if any of these resonate for you. So at the Monroe Institute, which is a place that I've been a lot, where they do a lot of work with consciousness and developing consciousness, but also out-of-body experiences. But they have a tool called the Resonant Energy Balloon. And basically the Resonant Energy Balloon is just drawing in your mind your auric field, which is, if you think of that picture that Leonardo da Vinci did with the man with the arms outstretched and the legs outstretched. So your auric field is basically the egg around you that would go like this with your arms, and then same thing with your feet up. So it's a real part of us. It's our energy body. And so you can imagine it. You can breathe in through your heart, and then you breathe out through the top of your head, and you let that rain down around you. And people like to do it two different ways. Some people like to have it come down like a fountain, and other people like it to swirl around. There's not a correct answer in that, just what feels more comfortable to you. And then you bring that energy that's raining down or swirling around back in through the soles of your feet and your perineum, which is the part between, for a woman, between the vagina and the anus, and for a man it would be between the testicles and the anus, kind of where the prostate is sitting in that little bit of tissue. And you draw it back in, and you repeat that, and you really get to feel that. You want to feel it in all the directions all around your body, that you have this really firm balloon or egg, or however you want to conceive it. And then you set the permeability to that. And so I suggest that what you set the permeability is only to love and things that are really good for you. And everything else is like that thing that we would say when we were kids: I am rubber, you are glue. Everything you say bounces off of me and sticks back onto you. So anything that's not good for you is going to bounce off your resonant energy balloon. So that's tool A. Tool B, flower essences. So in the Australian bush flower essences, there's two essences I work with often. And one is fringed violet. And if you look at the picture of the fringed violet, it looks just like the auric field. It's just like this purple flower with this like really fuzzy stuff all around. And it really is a good flower essence for shoring up the auric field and creating better boundaries. And then there's another one. They're both Australian bush flower essences. And the other one is called Angel Sword. And Angel Sword, I look at as one that is as like a sword that kicks out the crap that has gotten into your auric field while it was still not firmed up, and it kicks it out and moves it out. So that was thing 2. Thing 3 is in Chinese medicine. There's jade windscreen, which I wish I could tell you the pinyin of, but I'm not that good with pinyin. But jade windscreen is a really ancient. I think it's Yu Peng. I don't know. I just can't remember that. But anyway, jade windscreen. There's lots of forms of it. It's got a lot of astragalus, but it's got a couple other herbs in it. And so mostly people take it as an immune strengthening formula, and it's actually really appropriate right now in the time of COVID, because astragalus is actually an herb that can boost our immune systems very well. But the other 2 things in it really help shore up the auric field. And in very small doses, it's used more for that. So it's used more for emotional protection. So you could use it in small or large doses. It's not that expensive. You could get it any number of places, like the Shen Clinic would have it. And, there's lots of places that you could get it in the Bay Area. So those are 3 suggestions. Hopefully one of them would resonate. Bags under your eyes. Is usually in Chinese medicine has to do with the kidney meridian. And so it can also have to do with detox. If they're dark color bags, then usually there's like stagnant fluids somewhere in the body. So you might consider getting acupuncture or getting some sort of energy work that works through meridians. There's something called acutonics, which where they work on the energy. If you don't want to have needles in it, they work on different points with tuning forks. And there is a practitioner. What is her name? I'll think of it. There's a practitioner there's actually 2 in Berkeley that are teachers of acutonics. And so they can work with the tuning forks to move the energy in that way. Or you could just do needling, but maybe you wouldn't feel like doing needling like during the COVID time. And then in osteopathy, there was a teacher in the early 20th century, like Chapman, and he talked about something called the pelvic thyroid syndrome. And so when you mentioned that you had the bags under your eyes and you had the low thyroid, it made me think of the pelvic thyroid syndrome. So osteopathic work might help, but there may have been like precursors even when you were younger, before you had the thyroid problem, that were leading to the bags under the eyes, or were foreshadowing that. And if you still have the bags, that I would say, even if your lab tests are fine, you're probably not fully corrected. Yeah, I think, working with our thoughts is really key, and knowing that, how we're focusing really makes a difference. Like, we're in a time of intense transformation, and something is happening that's not just a virus. And I'm not going to say much more than that. But, there's that Chinese, crisis equals danger plus opportunity. And I think really I'm an optimist. And I think that we are transforming. And so the more we can stay grounded within ourselves and physically grounded to Mother Earth. So physically connecting with the earth, also connecting with sunlight and air and breathing exercises and movement and embodying. And then looking at our thoughts and not judging them, but just noticing, like, is what we're thinking about making us happy, or is it making us miserable? And how can we change what we're focusing on if it's not making us happy? So really allowing our emotional response to what we're thinking about, guide us to better feeling things. Because when we do that, we can dream a new world into being. So instead of focusing on what we don't want and what we're afraid of and what, whatever it is, that we don't want in this, whether it's like, older people dying or, enforced vaccinations, or whatever it is that we're afraid of, if we can focus on what we do want, what is the world that we want to birth, and imagine that we really are birthing, a transformation and consciousness on this planet, because I think that we are. And so it means not being distracted by so many of the things that we are presented with to be distracted by, and really, checking in with our own internal experience and our own wisdom and knowledge, and validating that too. So that's what I do every day. I look at what my own responses to things are, and, what my knee-jerk responses to things are. And they're different. Some people have the opposite knee-jerk responses, but ultimately I want to live in a free society of compassionate and caring human beings who are interconnected, who, create beauty and art and health for our planet, and love. And I think that this is possible. I think we can move our civilization to something that is the next evolution of goodness. And so, I see it as a spiral, and so we're moving out on another spiral arm. And so I want to be a part of that, and I want to be a part of giving birth to that. So I feel very happy to be participating and doing my part. And I think that's another piece too, is having, feeling like you're making a meaningful contribution. So, even for children, like feeling like they're helping someone else, or helping an animal, or someone that they care about in some way, can really, really be helpful. And I guess then the last part of that is self-esteem. And I think right now, a lot of people's self-esteem is really flagging, and people are feeling disempowered. But I think we are so empowered. And I think our thoughts are magic and creative. That's it.